They also try to open dialogue on current topics related to trans issues, organizing discussions, events, and meetings, both within the community and external. So welcome, Matty. And before going to the questions, we would like to do a small reminder on the rules of how this discussion is going to proceed. First, we are going to, we've organized it in a small block with 3 targeted questions for each one of the speakers. These questions are going to be around 10 minutes long. On the second place, we want to remind speakers within the second block, which is going to be general questions, to raise their hands to intervene. And finally, we will also take questions of the audience. The audience is allowed to send questions to either Alex or Lola, as the chat will be deactivated. And as a little reminder, please keep an open mind, because this is an educational discussion with open questions, and we are working together and not against each other. So without further delay, I'm going to proceed to the first block, which is health and sport. So the first question, which is going to be directed to Joanna. Is there a proven advantage, either biologically and observed results in competition, of trans women over cis women? And how does it relate with hormonal therapy and the transition process? We would also want, if you could, to give us some hints or some lines around the intersex condition. So Joanna, the floor is yours.
So on average, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, but on average, transgender women are taller, bigger, and stronger than cisgender women. And those are advantages in many sports. However, transgender women also have disadvantages. Their larger frames are now being powered by reduced muscle mass, reduced aerobic capacity, and that can lead to disadvantages in things like quickness, recovery, endurance. But beyond that, we allow advantage in sport. Perhaps one of the best examples is left-handed athletes have many advantages over right-handed athletes. It's most notable in the sport of fencing, where 40% of elite fencers are left-handed versus 10% of the population. What we don't allow is overwhelming advantage. So we don't let big boxers get into the ring with little boxers, because there's no way the little boxer can overcome the size disadvantage. So while it's true that trans women do have advantages, they also have disadvantages, and the biggest disadvantage is in terms of psychosocial disadvantages. The trans people are much more prone to depression. The exclusionary policies are social disadvantages. So overall, if we look at all of the advantages and disadvantages, one way of quantifying that is to look at representation. If everything were equal, trans people, who make up roughly 1% of the population, would make up 1% of elite athletes. And despite the fact that trans women do have some advantages, in elite sport, anywhere in the world, trans women are still substantially underrepresented in sport. And that gives an indirect indication that despite having some advantages, overall, trans women are disadvantaged in sport, largely because of the psychosocial disadvantages. Now, when we talk about intersex women, there are substantial differences depending on what intersex condition we look at. But if we look at so-called XY DSDs, or conditions in which a human being is born with a Y chromosome and hence testes, but external female genitalia. So these people are identified at birth as female and raised as female. Now, again, there's several XY DSDs, but in some of them, the affected athletes will go through a testosterone-fueled masculinizing puberty, gaining all of the advantages that men get from going through that sort of puberty. And so for that small group of intersex women, the physiological conditions are similar to trans women. There are, of course, sociological differences, because now you're looking at a group of people who were raised and socialized as female, and as Lola was saying earlier, may not discover that they have an intersex condition until their later teens. So, this adds an entire level of complexity to the complexity that already exists with trans athletes. Of note, there are only 2 sports worldwide in which intersex women are significantly overrepresented, and that's athletics and football. And certainly in any other sport, it's just not reasonable in any way to put in regulations on intersex women, but it is reasonable in those 2 sports, in football and in athletics. And how those regulations on intersex women apply, again, it's a very complicated issue, and I don't, I could spend a lot of time on it, but I think I'll just end there.
Thank you so much, Joanna. If anyone else has additional comments, maybe we can discuss a bit more about it at the end. But the following question is going to go to Matty, and it's a blog focused on media, hate, and hate speech. So the question is, how is the media portraying the topic, and how and why is it instrumentalized by transphobic movements? So Matty, the floor is yours.
Hi, hello, I'm Matty. It was stated before. And I'm going to talk about the trans, non-binary, and intersex people in media and how it portrays them, and how it portrays them in, oh my God, I'm sorry, in the context of sports. So yeah, it's issue that we as transparent are trying to face, that we're trying to address, because whenever we post something on our social media or we go to schools, that the sports question is usually raised, like, how are you dealing with this? How are you dealing with that? And we are kind of worried of talking about this topic because it's still huge, public issue in Czech Republic, talking about trans, non-binary, intersex people at sports. Because we are right now in Czech Republic, we're facing a public issue because forced sterilizations are still a thing for trans people there. And this is putting a stop to a blockade between us and the people we are trying to reach. That's why we're not usually talking about sports in public or in general. First of all, we are not really knowledgeable about this topic as much, since none of us is an athlete. We are all activists, and we are all in media or college fields. We're mostly focused on education or media, but we're trying to talk about this topic more. And we're trying to destigmatize this topic and destigmatize the topic of trans people in general. Usually we just say, no, we talk about trans people as people, see them as people they are, not their bodies. Don't focus and don't over-focus on their bodies, because that's not the main thing that makes a human. I don't know if that makes sense right now, and it's so weird since I don't hear people interacting. I'm sorry, it's my first discussion online, and when I don't hear the people or see them, it's really weird. Wow.
We are here. No.
Thank you. And so what we're trying to do is educate the public about the general knowledge we have on trans people, trans, non-binary, and intersex people. And we usually do that with our social media. We do that when we talk in media. We do that in panel discussions and talking with politicians and telling them, yes, these are the trans people that are portrayed in media, that are being portrayed as quote unquote the villains of the stories, and these people who are dangerous. And this is us, the real trans people, talking for the trans community. And as you can see, I'm a human just like you, and I have my hobbies, I have things I like to do. And I like, for example, going out and doing stuff and trying to make them see the human side of trans people, and trying to let them see, yeah, we are facing these real life issues and we are facing them every day. And it's really hard to be a trans person in Czech Republic. And there's no reason to make it harder for us. There's no reason for you to portray us in this matter in media as you do, as some kind of villains who are trying to invade public spaces, who are trying to invade sports. Because some trans people just like doing sports. That's what they do. They're not trying to invade a space. They're trying to create a space for them where they can be safe and they can do what they love. And we're trying to show people and politicians and media, we're trying to show them this side of trans community, the human one, and trying to educate them on what it actually means to be a trans person, and that it's not the thing that some of the political parties are using against us. And basically they're trying to create this irrational fear in people that they should be afraid of trans people. And we are here like, no, these are not valid claims, and this is the trans people, and we are the trans people, and there's no reason to be afraid.
Thank you so much, Matty. Actually, I think you're completely right on what you're saying regarding the importance of talking about it more. And I think this initiative that has been brought by Lola, it's an amazing opportunity to actually do this. And now the last question we're gonna raise to Peter has a lot to do with that, because it is, how can we educate on the topic and the different narratives? So Peter.
Sorry, I was still off, the sound was off. I think that we really have to look at the political context here. The whole discussion and even the questions asked in this forum are highly politicized. If people would just treat transgenders and intersex people as normal people like anyone else, and there would be a little bit of empathy for differences, there would be no discussion at all. There would be no, but the problem here is that everything gets confused. There is a focus on women transgenders, not men transgenders. And then it's the sports is kind of generalized. We're not making the difference between recreational sports or top sports. And then the whole thing is like as if transgender women are pushing out cisgender women on purpose from sports or something like that. So this is a highly politicized question, which has nothing to do with kind of the physical realities that we are dealing with. You can go into all the information about the physical realities, but it won't change the mind of the traditional values lobby that is trying to push a negative agenda, a conservative agenda, and using the stick to hit the transgenders because they are most vulnerable group that won't hit back so hard. They hope. So I think this makes the education issue extremely sensitive and difficult, because anything that you say about this will be picked up as political. I think when we're talking about education, we need to take two things into account. One is maybe a little bit controversial here. I think that we should not focus too much on representation. I think we should focus a lot on participation, inclusion, and human values. To be just generally respectful to each other, and stress in sports that sportivity means inclusion and fair play, and that everybody can participate, and teamwork, that sort of thing. So I think that's very important in a specific area of sports. Another issue is that we could focus more on heteronormativity and point out that a lot of this goes back to kind of wider traditional values, and that the traditional values lobby is actually not out to kind of combat injustice, but they're out to further their conservative agenda, which is not only damaging transgenders or intersexuals, but also LGBTIQ plus in general, and also cisgender women, and maybe also cisgender men in a way, because it's kind of pushing a rigid heteronormative agenda on anyone. I think when we look practically to how we could do this education, I would like to refer to a discussion I participated in yesterday online, which was an ILGA-led discussion on how to engage with polarized political narratives. And there were a number of interesting examples there of from Spain and from Poland, about how local organizations engaged in video clip campaigns where they showed transgenders or intersex people who were kind of talking to other people about their experiences. So this is like a very, in Europe at least, it's a very traditional way of storytelling. And it focuses on getting empathy and making people not a stereotype of a transgender or an intersex person, but a real person. And so the Spanish campaign was called the Gratitude Campaign. And it showed transgenders and their supporters how grateful they were for the mutual understanding they had. And they used this campaign as a way to support the new trans law in Spain, the recent one, which was heavily opposed, of course, by the conservative parties. And but they had a lot of success with this. One of the things that they discovered is after research that actually the presence online by the LGBTIQ movement is substantial, while the voices of the conservatives are very loud, but they're actually not so, they're not so well represented. The only thing is that they have one clear narrative, which is protection of traditional values. And the LGBTI movement doesn't seem to have a clear enough narrative to fight this. So this is one of their conclusions, that we need to have a more clear narrative to combat these things. and that the narrative should focus on something that is emotionally appealing to the big middle, movable middle.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think there's something super interesting in one of the issues you raised about how this heteronormative agenda that is being pushed with these traditional values is not only affecting trans people in the sport, but it's actually affecting the way we are actually building gender. So maybe that's something we can explore later if there are questions of the audience. And right now I'm going to raise a question for the three of you. The question is, are gender categories still relevant in sports? And whether we could imagine a different system that would take into consideration differences otherwise, like, for example, what we have in judo, which depends on the weight of the person. So if any of you wants to start, the others, if you want, you can raise your hand. Joanna.
So when, again, I think as Peter was saying, I think we need to look at this in two different lights, whether we are talking about recreational or grassroots sports or elite sports. And I think in grassroots and recreational sports, there are any number of ways that we could subdivide sports participants into different categories other than sex, gender. And you know, certainly by weight, by ability, or not. There are sports such as ultimate frisbee, which are inherently mixed sex gender sports. And so there are all sorts of interesting and innovative ideas that can be done instead of just having men's sports and women's sports at grassroots levels. However, when we get to elite sports, professional sports, Olympic sports, if we want to see women winning Olympic medals, earning professional sports contracts, if we want those things, and I would suggest that as a society, of course, we should want those things, then there needs to be a women's category, and there need to be appropriate eligibility requirements for that category. Any individual, regardless of how they were assigned at birth or what their gender identity is, if that individual goes through a masculinizing puberty, that individual will gain enormous athletic advantages over anyone who doesn't go through a masculinizing puberty. And so we need to be very careful when we allow intersex or trans women into women's sports who have been through a masculinizing puberty. It doesn't mean we can't allow them in, because I'm a big proponent of inclusive policies. However, there need to be appropriate eligibility requirements when it comes to elite sports. As I say, on the other hand, in mass participation sports, let's be creative. Let's do all kinds of different things. But we do need to draw a line between those two levels of sport.
Matty or Peter, any of you want to respond?
Yes, I'm a little bit more positive I think than Joanna on this. I think in the long run we should definitely look at getting rid of gender in a lot of sports. Maybe with the exception of some top sports, but only when there's a really proven need to make a differentiation. I was abhorred in August when the World Federation for Chess Playing made a decision that transgender women could not participate anymore unless it was proven that they were women. I was thinking, chess? What has this to do? Is there some kind of brain surgery happening when you're transitioning? So I really kind of, here again, I say it's political. it's political, it's sexist and heteronormative, and it's largely political. So I think one of the things that is difficult and challenging here is because I've been fighting all these 40 years that I'm working in this field, I've been fighting heteronormativity all the time. And this is a very, very slow and tough process. It's not only the cisgender heterosexuals that are impregnated by heteronormativity, but we are as well. And so it's almost unimaginable how a world would look like when you get rid of gender. So this, we really need to make strategy on that. We need to make a strategy on what we ultimately want for this. I think it's difficult to imagine because we're all so heteronormatized in our upbringing and in the way we interact with each other. So let's just make this a call in thinking about what we would ultimately want in 100 years, 1,000 years, and how we could strategize to get there. Because at the moment, I don't think even within the LGBT movement, we are not really thinking about that yet.
So a small follow-up question, and it's also for Joanna, and I think you'll also have the turn of reply. But I would also want you to add, if you can, the intersex condition that we already talked about it, right? Because with the intersex condition after being discovered after undergoing this medical test, does it make sense to base gender categories on hormonal levels? So if you can also address this perspective on your reply, that would be great.
Yeah, I would, I would suggest that it's not heteronormative to say that if we want to see women succeeding in highest levels of sport, there needs to be a women's category. I would suggest that if we look at women's football, we have seen such a large increase in the popularity of women's football, and at the same time, the acknowledgement that a substantial proportion of the best footballers in the world are not heterosexual. And there is, within the sport of women's football, there is enormous acceptance of lesbian, gay, non-heterosexual women in that sport. However, if we want to see the Women's World Cup, if we want to see women succeeding at the highest level in football, there needs to be women's football. It has been shown over and over again that if the best women's footballers in the world cannot succeed, not just against the best men, but against third and fourth rate, third division, fourth division, fifth division men's teams. So, the idea that we need women's sports at the highest level is not in any way heteronormative. Now, the question of testosterone-based categories for women's sport, as I say, I would argue till the end of my days that we need a women's category, and we need eligibility requirements. And I would suggest that when we decide on eligibility for women's sports, we should look at the things that differentiate female athletes from male athletes. And while there are several of those, the single most important differentiating factor is the exposure to high levels of testosterone starting in puberty and extending beyond puberty. And so anyone who has these much higher levels of testosterone has enormous athletic advantages over people who don't. And so it's somewhat arbitrary. It's not perfect, but choosing eligibility requirements for high-level, elite-level women's sports based on testosterone levels is a logical, practical thing to do. It's not perfect, but I do support that. Now, I admit that when it comes to looking at trans athletes and intersex athletes, there is a significant difference. Suppressing testosterone is part of the therapeutic process involved in a medical transition for trans women. Trans women, on average, are healthier, happier, and perhaps most importantly, less suicidal with typical female hormone values. That is not necessarily true of intersex women. There are many intersex women who are perfectly happy with their bodies and don't wish to have any changes. And if you are requiring intersex women to lower their testosterone for sports, it has to be acknowledged that that can be a hardship on some of those intersex women. And it brings up a very difficult philosophical point. However, I do think that that in those sports where it has been shown, and specifically athletics and football, where it has been shown that intersex women have a large overrepresentation in those sports, then in those cases where the preponderance of evidence indicates that it is reasonable to put testosterone-based requirements, even though it may impose a hardship on some intersex women and some trans women too. There are some trans women who, you know, identify as female but don't wish to lower their testosterone, and that's fine, except if you want to compete in elite level sports. And so it may be an unpopular opinion in this group, but that is the opinion I hold, and I you know, I have studied this for multiple years, and so this is an informed opinion, even if it's an unpopular opinion in this group.
Thank you so much. Let's move a bit further from biology and measurement and go back to hate speech as Lola defined it from the beginning. The second open question that I would love for Matty to take the mic first and give us their opinion is, in regards to the little research on the topic, is there a sensible way to address the topic to avoid spreading hate towards targeted individuals? So how could we sensibly address this topic, especially considering that a lot of people in here belong to both, and those are questions that in a political movement, in a political party, you get addressed a lot, especially as members of the LGBT community and as human rights defenders.
I'm sorry, can you please just repeat the question?
Yes,
I think my internet connection is really wonky for some reason.
It's completely fine. No, the question is that considering that we said that there is a little research on the topic, what sensible ways to address the topic on women, on trans women in sports there are, in order to not increase this hate and to avoid spreading hate towards targeted individuals? As you said, sometimes it's difficult to actually make people understand what we are talking about. So what do you think would be a good way to actually address this topic in the public sphere?
So, like I said, we're not really used to talking about this topic in public. We're trying to, I don't want to say avoid it as much as possible, because that's not really true. But when people ask us about this specific thing, we try to make them understand that it's not the most important, like, in a trans person's life, right? And a lot of people are talking mainly about trans women, and no one is talking about trans men and non-binary people in sports. Why? Are they advantaged or disadvantaged? They have higher levels of testosterone as well. They're taking testosterone. And where should they compete? They don't have the physical build of a cis man, or not yet, but they have a higher level of testosterone than a cis woman. So this makes this category of like women competing with women biologically and men competing with men biologically is completely like taking this and throwing it out of the window, because now we have trans men, and what are you going to do, political parties, with trans men? Are you even going to address them? And there are trans men in sports and in Czech context, and also there was Zdeněk Koubek, who was an intersex and trans athlete in the early 20s, and he was winning in the women's category, and then he was winning in the men's category. So it is possible to win in both, as you can see, for some people. And people are not really talking about these things when they're talking about trans people in sports. They're only focusing on trans women in sports, even though it's shown time and time again that they're not really winning every time. That they say that there is an advantage, but you can't see it like every single time. There's a trans woman who wins one time and lost 10 times before in the same category, but no one is talking about these 10 times. They're only focused on that one time she won. Maybe she won because she actually tried. She tried her best to win, as any other woman would. And no one is talking about these cases. So I would judge these cases case by case and look at each an individual case and how it's like, yeah, she lost 10 times and won one time, but she won that one time because she's trans, not because she's good. I don't think that's really fair, and I don't feel like the media or anyone is actually seeing it like this. So I feel like it's important to mention the context, and the context that was presented before. It is important. And even though there might be some biological and physical advantages, they don't come to the surface every single time. She's not winning 10 times in a row. She won one time. And people just don't see it as such. So I feel like that's not really fair for the trans person. They're only trying to do what they like. They're only trying to win. Everyone is in the sports field to win, or in the professional level. And she wins that one time, and people are hating for that. So I don't feel like that's really fair for the trans person. And it's putting so much pressure on that person, because now they're in the spotlight and everyone is seeing this person as this quote unquote villain who attacked this sport, who took the women's space and took the victory. That one victory she took it from them. No, she didn't take it. It was hers to take. Anyone could have won. The other 10 times the other women won, and now it's her time to shine because she deserved it. So I personally see it like this, and I feel like we should talk about these things more. We should talk about more about trans men in sports, and we should talk about the fact that trans women are not winning every single time. But that one time she wins, everyone is talking about that, and it's like a really political and it's really, like Peter said, it's very like a political topic that everyone is talking about for that one for a moment, and it's a huge deal. and no one is seeing the whole story, the whole context. So I think that's very important if you're addressing these things, to say yes, but there is a context, there's a history behind this, and you should see it as well.
Thank you, Matty. Peter, Joanna, you have anything to add?
Yeah, one of the things that Matty said, you know, this idea that you know, a trans woman is taking a win that doesn't belong to her. I would suggest that that trans women should be considered as a subcategory of all women. And so, you know, what Matty was saying is that in the larger group of all women, trans women are a part of that group and should be entitled to, you know, to everything that all other women are entitled to.
I didn't say that they're not like entitled. I am like pro-trans person. I'm a trans person myself.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah. No, I'm 100% agreeing with you. I'm saying that I agree that trans women are entitled to compete for everything that other women are entitled to compete for. Trans women belong, and you know, it would be reasonable for trans women to win a book award that's only given to authors, of female authors. You know, it would be appropriate for trans women to win a cooking contest that is only open to female chefs, and so on and so on. And that trans women do belong in women's spaces. And so, yeah, I agree 100% with you on this, Matty. And as you say, I think the problem is that many people think of trans women as men who believe they're women, as opposed to being a subcategory of all women. And that of course applies to trans men and to non-binary trans people as well. We all are who we say we are. And just as a side note, when in terms of trans man, there is a professional boxer, Patricio Manuel. He is a trans man. He fights cis men, and he, as a professional boxer, is now 3-0. So he has won all 3 of his professional fights against cis men. So he has won every time, at least in a professional sense. But again, nobody is worried about that because he's a trans man. But yeah, trans men can be successful in men's sports.
Thank you, Joanna. Peter, I saw you also had something to say.
Yeah, I want to highlight more a technical aspect of how to deal with hate speech, and especially in the form of education. There is a famous scientific theory called the intercontact theory, which have brought us lots of information on how to do this type of information. And the theory says that if you have people that other people don't like LGBT people, but also immigrants or peoples of certain races or anyone who is not inside your own bubble, if you get to know these people, intergroup contact, then automatically the tolerance goes up, and empathy also goes up, and then much of this fuss disappears. And this is without arguments, you know. That is important to note, that we are talking in this discussion often about hormones and transition and arguments and whatever, and what people believe, but it's not in the head, it's in the belly or in the heart, whatever where you think that emotions are located. But I usually feel it in my belly, you know, if I don't feel comfortable with something, my belly starts to feel not so nice. And what we need to do is to have interventions that go into this underbelly feeling. So intercontact theory has brought a lot of information about that. One of the things they have found out through research is that role modeling can be very important. It's not only that groups can be physically, for example, Matty could go as a trans into a group of students, for example, and tell about her own experiences or their own experiences, and that will have an effect. But you can also, it will especially work when you're slightly older than those people that you educate, and when you tell a story in which you show that you were challenged by all kinds of problems and that you then overcome them. If you just have a story which is a complaining story, then it doesn't help so much. So it's really important to be a role model that is strong, that has overcome the problems, but not only telling how incredibly good you are, but also admitting that there were challenges and that you have overcome them. And when these challenges relate to your audience, then you make a true connection, a heart-to-heart connection with your group that you relate to, then it really helps very well. Another nice thing that they found out is that you don't have to be live. You can also do that on video or even on paper. So telling that type of stories on paper or on video has almost the same effect as doing it live. The main thing is that it appears to be authentic. And it can only appear authentic when it is authentic, of course, because otherwise people see that you are playing. And so that's difficult. So these are a few kind of technical aspects that I would recommend when you do education about this. And when we're really talking about hate speech, I want to say one other thing. I give a lot of training to teachers who get frightened by all kinds of negative comments in the classroom. And what I do is explain to them that when you are confronted with something that is weird or strange or frightening, then you get a kind of emotional fight or flight response. And this is true for the students because the kind of the homophobes and the transphobes are people who we think are the enemy and maybe and angry and nasty people, but we should also realize that they have this feeling because they also have a fight and flight response, and they feel that their values are being threatened. So if you can jump over your own fight and flight response because you think they're the enemy and I have to squash them and use all kinds of arguments not to show that they're wrong, that doesn't help. You have to show empathy for their position. They are traditional, they are conservative, they are frightened, they are angry because they are frightened. And so what you need to do is connect to that anger and fright. And if you can make a real connection with that kind of people, then it's you have an opening to do education, because if you try to do education before without connection to their emotions, nothing helps. Nothing helps at all. So this is why these kind of small media campaigns with clips where you talk about your feelings, and maybe where you talk with your mother about your feelings, or with your sport teacher about your feelings and your experiences. If you put that on video, even when you use a cell phone with bad image, kind of not high quality image or something, when it's authentic and you have a nice conversation of 2 minutes with your sport teacher as a transgender, for example, that has 100 times more impact than a hate speech by some kind of religious preacher or something, because the hate drips from that. So people, especially the movable middle, the people who can be changed, they will be touched by the authenticity and the humanness of that kind of education. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Peter. I think it was an amazing response. And I really like what you mentioned about the underbelly feeling, because it came to mind. I don't know if it's only Spain or it's everywhere, but something that is being said a lot around is that you need to pay attention to this underbelly feeling, because these butterflies sometimes cannot be related to love, but they can actually be anxiety. So it's important to actually pay attention to them. And after these great interventions, we've already gathered some questions from the audience, that if any of you have further questions, keep submitting them and we will just raise them. And we have a very super interesting first question. We've mingled with another one because they were really related. And going back to what we said about the measurements and the regulations, but also touching a bit on these heteropatriarchal structures that they are trying or not to impose on us. The first question that I'm going to raise for you three, that has been raised by the public, it's, have the studies that inform the regulations considered that sports, as they develop, are designed, tools, and calibrated for men? Have we considered that the sports themselves must change so as not to be inherently sexist? And also, we are going to adapt the following question. So, which is, what would be the right indicator to limit who is eligible for the women category, and how can we defend that politically? So a very broad three-part question.
Could you repeat that last part again, please?
Yes. It connects to what we've commented at the end. So what would be the right indicators to limit who is eligible for the women category? What do you think? And how could we defend that politically? Also connecting to what we said about sharing it and being able to sensibilize the population.
So if I may address at least that second part, again, I think that at most levels of sport, we should just let people play where they want to play. You know, the idea that that trans women in particular are all going to be competing in elite sport is certainly not true. The vast majority of well, the reality is that the vast majority of trans people don't compete or participate in sport at all because we don't feel very welcome there. And so at the level where most people participate in sport, we should be as inclusive as possible. And so, you know, at those levels of sport, we should just use gender identity. If there's a men's team and a women's team, let people play where they're most comfortable. But as I've said before, in elite sport where there is, you know, there's money, there's Olympic medals, professional contracts at stake, which is only a very small portion of sport, then as I say, I think we should use a biological separator between male athletes and female athletes. In 2023 and indeed in 2024 as well, there is no better separator than testosterone. And I'll step aside there and let other people comment.
Peter, Matty, what's your opinion? Also, I would love for you to comment on what they've raised, on whether it's been considered that sports themselves must change so as not to be sexist themselves. Maybe the structure of the sport that must change. What do you both think?
Personally, I feel really uncomfortable with this question because I completely agree with Joanna that we are actually talking and focusing on this over 0.5% of the elite sporters that are competing for this 1 second faster or 1 inch further. And I think it really kind of, even, you know, when I visited the LGBT games for the first time, I'm not a sport person so much, but one of the things that really stood out for me is that it was so much fun, and it was so much warmth, and it wasn't. There was competition, but it was all friendly competition. You know, it's a completely different atmosphere from the hard commercial PR dominated. And what I think Joanna says very rightly, elite sports. It's not even top sports. It has become a commercialized capitalist venture where where people are iconized and fetishized. I'm really, this is why I feel uncomfortable with this discussion. Because it focuses on that little group of fetishized people or earning millions maybe. I really don't want to have anything to do with it. I really would like to focus on recreational sports and friendly competition sports and see, and I don't really see any necessity there to make such strong differences between men and women. On the contrary, I think it would be very good if we get rid of the gender division there, because it will actually add to the friendliness of the sports when people mix completely in those sports.
Yeah, I completely agree with Peter. Thank you so much that you said that. It was very strong. It really resonated with me. I would like to out myself. I'm not a sports person, but I am a teacher, and you see kids just playing sports. And in Scandinavia, it's actually not against the school policy to divide kids based on their gender or sex. And I see that in Czech Republic, it's not against the school policy, and the schools are doing it. And they're making a huge gap between those two categories. They're making a huge like gap between the genders and sexes. And it's actually dividing the people instead of bringing them together, which is, I feel like it's the main purpose of doing sports, bringing people or kids together, do an activity, do a recreational activity, going outside and actually exercising for once. I know it's like really rare and it sounds really weird coming from me. I feel really weird saying this. But yeah, in Scandinavia, it's actually against the school policies to divide sports based on genders in schools. And because it's actually giving the kids two different categories of education. It's like dividing the educational system as well, and it's giving them basically a different experience in the school environment. So I would like to add that.
Yeah, I think it's also, it can be a question of time, because 100 years ago, most schools in Europe and America were segregated. And now we think that's heteronormative and sexist nowadays. So that's a century later. So why can that happen in sports?
Thank you so much for your insights. I think it's very important what we are talking about and what you addressed at the beginning, Peter, right? Like, where are we putting the focus? Because that's something related to what Matty also said, that sometimes you just villainize this one time, or you just villainize this super high level competition where only one gets it, but there's an issue that starts like in schools and with grassroots sports, as Joanna was also defending. So we have a question more related. We've already kind of covered that, but it's more related to why are people then feeling so easily offended and targeted it? And if we could have kind of a toolkit, like the three things we could bring home, even if probably most of us are already home. So the three things we can bring to bed and to our activism or to our daily life from now on, in order to address with this topic to people who feel deeply touched and offended by it. If you could give three recommendations that we should take into account and that we can actually put forward and use. I don't know if any of you wants to take the floor first. Peter, I don't know if you're speaking, but you're silent.
Well, I'm actually not very clear what the question was.
So we've been talking about how people are feeling very, very easily offended by this matter, and that this matter is being weaponized by some right-wing groups and transphobic movements in order to raise hate towards the trans community in general. And so the question could be, what are the main suggestions that you could give the audience that is now listening and that may further engage in this topic, if we could have 3 main points in order to have this conversation with other people? For example, always remember to try to get the focus away on this 1% that is competing for a high-level position, which would be the main recommendations that you could give others as experts on the matter, but in different domains, for us to be able to address this topic with people who feel offended or threatened by trans athletes in sports when we encounter these conversations, which we do. I don't know if it's a bit more clear.
Well, maybe if we need to do something, if we can do something, maybe it would be interesting if we want to focus on the 1%, to have some kind of campaign or information where these people tell more, these top athletes tell more about their personal experiences. Matty already talked about that many people competing will have had numerous experiences that they lost. And then they win, and then they suddenly get reproached that it's because of their identity rather than anything else, rather than because they trained for it for years. So this is a typical kind of story of challenge and overcoming it. And then there's a new challenge. You win, and then you're challenged because your people invalidate you for that. So I don't think that you can convince the opponents by using all kinds of arguments having to do with hormones and with skeletons and weights and you know, because the people who are not convinced have this underbelly feeling that they are disadvantaged. It has to do with them, not with you. So what you need to do is to try to make this connection with the feeling that they are disadvantaged. A trans athlete can tell her story, his story, their story, about their lives, the challenges, how they got where they were there. And also, maybe you can talk with other people who are disappointed that they lost, but have a conversation with the winner, for example, without hate. And where the number 2 admits, yes, you were better, something like that. If you put that on video, that would be kind of a very different narrative than the populist right-wing conservatives have.
I think that focusing on the humanity of trans people is a good thing to do. I think you know, the idea of presenting trans people as invaders. I think if one presents a trans person, how they felt marginalized, excluded, and then they join a club and they play sports with other people who are accepting and welcoming, and all of the wonderful things that does for them as a person enjoying sports with others. And I think that focusing on that sort of narrative as a trans person, rather than an invader, as someone who is welcome within a community, a sporting community, and you know, those sorts of you know, a little video or whatever showing trans man, a trans woman, a non-binary trans person coming out and enjoying sports with others. I think that's a very powerful narrative to put forward. And you know, the idea that trans people aren't so different than others, and all of the benefits that everyone can get from participating in sports. I think that pushing that sort of narrative is an effective way to fight all of the transphobic arguments that are out there.
But I think that we need to be aware that you're saying, Joanna, that we could stress that they're not so different as other people. Sometimes they are different, and non-binary different people are different because people don't understand why they are non-binary. So I don't think we should be apologetic or stress that we are normal or just like anybody else. We should, the humanity and the authenticity that we stress is that we are unique persons like anybody else, but and anybody else is different. And some people may feel uncomfortable with that. And then we need to question why other people feel uncomfortable. We should not question our own authenticity. We should kind of be empowered to be strong role models here. So I think that's very important to remember as well. I've seen lots of videos, especially in the kind of developing countries at the moment. There's a wave of videos coming up from LGBTI movements there, where you see people complaining all the time that they are poor, that they are rejected, that they're a caste that has always been rejected, whatever. And it's not just not good education. It's you know, posing yourself as a victim and then asking for empathy in an apologetic way is not going to convince people. We need to be strategic in this.
I completely agree with what you both said about painting trans people in a more humane way. But unfortunately, it doesn't work for everybody because everybody is different. And there'll always be people who are going to be like, yeah, but what about it? What's in it for me? What am I supposed to do with this? This person is different. Why are they different? And you need, of course, you need an argument for this type of narratives as well, because there will be people like this who are like, I don't care, I just care about myself, because some people are just like that, or they just like prefer this way of thinking. And in that type of narrative, you need to show them that there are studies, that this is not what the people actually came up with, that they're just trans from one day to another, that they're, because some people are more convinced with words and emotions, and some people are more convinced with data. And fortunately for us, all of us here, there are data for trans and non-binary and intersex people existing. There are data about their lives and how they actually perceive the world. We, as Transparent, we did the numerous researches on this topic as well. And we've done numerous researches on how difficult can it be to be a trans person. Because for a lot of people, they perceive trans people as these people who are just bored and they didn't know what to do with their lives, so they decided to be trans. I myself, as a non-binary person, heard that claim numerous times, that I was just bored and that's why I'm non-binary. And I'm like, no, I wasn't bored. This is just who I am. And if I try to be somebody else, if I try to mask myself and be quote unquote normal, as you all like to use this word, like it's a candy, you're handing it like this, I would be very miserable. And there are numerous data, numerous researches on this topic. For example, in the school environment, that if they're not accepted, if the kids are not accepted in the school environment, they will just withdraw themselves from the school. You can usually see the person not talking to anybody in the classroom or with the teachers. They are closed within themselves, not talking to anyone, and bubbling their own feelings and fears inside of them. And it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why, like, there are numerous researches and data that trans people are more prone to depression, anxiety, suicide. And you can show these researches to these people and be like, look, these are things you wanted to see. This is the sad reality that people are facing every single day. And you, if you accept the person as they are, you are lowering these numbers. You are lowering these chances of this person actually doing these things to themselves. Because why would you want to strip a person of their happiness, of their individuality? That's something that should be celebrated in a person. We don't live in the world where everything is the same. I think the world where everything is the same would be pretty boring, where you have a classroom full of students that are absolutely one and the same. They just have different faces. I feel like that would be boring. And there will be nothing to celebrate in this classroom. But if you have a classroom full of people who are colorful as a pencil, like yesterday, I worked with a picture. There were 24 pencils on that picture, and every single one had a different color. It was amazing. It was so unique. And everyone was so fascinated by it because, look, they're all different, but they're somehow working together. And they're creating this amazing environment where even though that they're not the same, they're working together so nicely. And if you just took one out, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be as perfect. It wouldn't be creating this perfect picture. So that's why trans people belong in the spaces. They are that one pencil. If you take it out, it won't be the same. They belong, just like everyone else. They have their own space in a space. Wow, that was a horrid sentence. I'm so sorry. And if we don't include them in a conversation in the classroom, they won't participate in sports. They won't participate in sports at all. I know so many trans people. I was one of them many years ago who didn't want to participate in PE classes because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel included. That wasn't good for my social life, my social health, my mental health, or my physical health. I was skipping the classes that were so important in the school environment. PE is very important for both socializing and physical, both social, mental, and physical health of a student, of a person. And if we're excluding the people from these environments, we are basically creating this person who doesn't want to socialize and who's just like distancing themselves more and more and more. And that can lead to tragedies, that can lead to terrible things. So that can also be an argument for people who don't think trans people are people, or all these different arguments that people can actually make. We don't know the story of the person, of the athlete. How were they raised? What's their history? Because we all have histories, our personal histories, our personal stories. So what is giving us the power to judge them for winning or for anything? if we don't know what their background is.
Thank you so much, Matty. I think it was an amazing way to actually almost wrap up this session, which was what we are going to do now. Thank you for sharing also your personal experience, because I think, as you said, some people may be more touched by feelings, some people may be more touched by data, but hearing your experience where you combine both clearly arrives and reach all of us, and I guess as many people as you always reach with your work. We wanted to also thank everyone who's still submitting questions. So we apologize for not having been able to answer them all. We were thinking that it could be a possibility that you send us your questions and we could send them to the different speakers so you can get answers. But I'm going to proceed to wrap up the session. First of all, thank you so much to the three speakers. It was amazing to hear all your expertise and also all your personal experiences on the matter. It's been an hour and a half, but I think we all have to take several hours to process everything we've learned, because we went from talking about the differences of transgender individuals in sports to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, the possible and the potential measurements, and how to include the intersex condition for the diverse situation. But also, we went to how like the questions are clearly politicized and how highly politicized, and how everything goes back to traditional values. And we wrapped it up saying how important it is to go back to this humanity of everyone and of also trans individuals, and how important it is to keep putting the issues on the table and to actually keep talking about it and educating people in order to change the narrative. Something that has been suggested actually by someone on the audience, it's how can a party like Bolt help? And I think this wrap up and everything that these speakers have been pointing forward of keep putting the issue on the table and helping switch the narrative is what we can do as a movement and as a party. For example, keeping in mind that the proportion is very small, and to focusing on the need and how it is necessary to put back the focus on the grassroots sports and not only on the 1% that don't really belongs to elite sports, where it's always what it's on the newspaper and on the media, instead of framing it as what it is, which is the day-to-day of some people. And also how important it is, like Matty just did as a great example, to sometimes reach the feeling of people, but also be aware how important it is to also connect it with data to reach the inner feeling, but also to act as catalysts so we can spread this information to everyone we talk to from now on, and to keep creating these spaces which are safe, in which we can have open debates with different perspectives and we can all learn together. Because as we said from the very beginning, we are not against each other, but we are with each other in order to learn better about this topic. So thank you so much, and a special thanks for all the organization that there was behind it. And thank you so much for attending. I give the microphone back to Lola.
Yes, just a quick few last words. Thank you so much. The recording of this session will be available on the Volt LGBTIQ+ website. And yeah, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me or Alexa. And if we are allowed, we might share the contact of the speakers, but I have to check with them first. If anything, I wish you the best evening, and yeah, have a nice evening. I think that's it for me.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, thanks, Guy. Bye, have a nice evening. Let's talk about it some other time.